The Chicago Bulls are in a very, very interesting predicament. This was a team that we go back to right before Lonzo Ball got hurt. And we were saying, now maybe weren't the favorites, but a team that looked like a team that could compete for an NBA championship. Like I said, obviously may not be guaranteed. There may not be everyone's opinion, but they were very, very good, playing at a very high level. Since that point in time, things have gone sideways. Lonzo Ball got hurt and just now finally made his return after over 1,000 days off the basketball court. You had a situation where DeMar DeRozan is now gone. He's removed from this team. Multiple trades and transactions have gone on throughout that time span. And you're in this situation now where you have a team that is confusing, to say the least. And when I look at the Chicago Bulls, I approach this season and I say, you know what? This actually has to be the last run. This is the last hurrah unless they prove everybody wrong. I personally don't see this team as a legitimate playoff threat, but the Eastern Conference is the worst conference out of the two conferences. They have got a lot of openings in that conference. They could make a run if all things come together and come to fruition for the Chicago Bulls. And when I look at this team, listen, this is why it has to be kind of the last hurrah. They've been trying to say this team can do it, they can compete, and it just hasn't come to fruition. Now DeMar DeRozan's gone, and you have Zach LaVine, Vucevic, and you have also Lonzo Ball. That's a veteran, obviously, that's kind of hanging around, but we'll see what happens there. But it's just going to be a season where the Chicago Bulls have to make a plan up. And that's what I want to break down to you guys today. Because the thing is that the Chicago Bulls have the future set. It's just a matter of, I feel like the Chicago Bulls aren't allowing the future to come to fruition yet. Partially it's their fault. Partially it's not. Because Zach LaVine, I know they tried trading him, but there just wasn't value for him. And Vucevic, I'm not sure what the story is behind him, but similar there. And then Lonzo Ball, obviously, you just didn't know he's ever going to play again, and now he's back, so that's great news. But let me break down this team, and let me explain a few things to you guys. First of all, the starting lineup. Josh Giddey is the starting point guard, in my opinion. Coby White, Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, Nikola Vucevic. Josh Giddey was the perfect move for this team to make. It went underneath the radar to a certain extent because the perception image of Josh Giddey is messed up because of what happened last year. And it's unfortunate when we know the exact rules. I'm not going to get into all that specifically. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm talking about talent. What Josh Giddey brings to the table is he's a guy that got stuck in a situation in Oklahoma where they have such an abundance of young talent and guys were all taking off and becoming stars and taking on their roles where he kind of got left behind. And he needed to develop a little bit more and just wasn't able to do so in Oklahoma. Well, I couldn't think of a better situation than doing that in Chicago, where it's his team at the point guard spot right now. Let him play and thrive. Yes, he's not the greatest defensive player in the NBA. Yes, there's a lot of liabilities offensively. But he's got a lot of potential and talent. Let him work out his kinks. Let him get better and develop overall as a player. And I think the Chicago Bulls will be rewarded for putting the trust in Josh Giddey. Going over to the shooting guard spot, Coby White. Breakout season happened last year. We finally saw the full version of Coby White, which everyone was hoping to see for such a long period of time. And I like Coby White a lot. I think Giddey fits perfectly with Josh Giddey, actually. I think Coby White fits perfectly with Josh Giddey in that backcourt. Underrated. Giddey can facilitate at a high level. He's a great elite passer. He's going to be able to get Coby White open. I think those two guys are very underrated backcourt in the NBA. And then you have Zach LaVine. Looks great in preseason. Hey, it's preseason. I'm not going to give too much into that. But we know what Zach LaVine's capable of. It's not like this guy's way past his prime age-wise. He's 29 years old. He still could have 3 to 4 more good years of basketball in his career. He's not past his prime. He's just been banged up injury-wise. He was in a weird situation in Chicago the past couple of years. He could have a massive breakout season or bounce-back season, I should say, this year. Would not shock me at all. So you have Zach LaVine there. Obviously, he's the best player on this roster overall if you talk about health. Then you have Patrick Williams, another guy that has not taken the full step forward in his career. But he's kind of become a good overall player in the NBA. Not a star by any stretch of the imagination, but a good, solid starter. Then Vucevic, another guy. I like to see him get traded eventually, but he's a good veteran for the time being. Obviously, the Chicago Bulls game plan is try to be competitive this year. He's going to have to stay on the team if you want to be competitive. We know what he brings to the table. He's a one-time All-Star in the NBA. He's been a good player overall throughout his career. He's still a productive center, nowhere near his prime self, but he's still a good center overall. But let's go down to this backup unit then. Lonzo Ball made his return. We're going to have to see what is he capable of doing. How many games does he play? How well does the knee hold up? So many questions to ask there. But what we saw last night was great. Great to see Lonzo Ball back in the NBA playing basketball again. But for Lonzo Ball, he's the backup point guard for now. And then you have Ayo Dosunmu. He's another guy that's a young player. We've seen flashes. I think he's another good, solid player that can be a rotational guy. I think this is kind of the role he's going to fit into now. I don't think he's ever going to be bound to be a starting player in the NBA. But being a guy you're going to see in the rotational, 7th, 8th, 9th man in the depth chart, exactly what he was destined to be I think he's going to finally get into that rotational role now. And then you also have Chris Duarte. He's going to be a guy that's also behind him, I think, going to get spot minutes here and there. We've seen him have flashes early in his career, not been as pleasant to see the past couple of years. But Chris Duarte, he's a solid overall guy, can space the floor, shoot the ball pretty well. He's going to be essentially the third unit shooting guard. Then you also have Javon Carter at the backup or third string point guard, as well as Taylor Horton-Tucker, who both, I think, solidifies roster now after the moves today that open up a few roster spots. I think Taylor Horton-Tucker is now on the roster. Good to see that. I think he's a good, productive NBA player. Javon Carter, we know he's capable of. A great, underrated defensive player. He's a good shooter overall. Solid player there. Here's where it gets interesting. Backup small forward for Zach LaVine. Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry will kind of be battling that out right there. I like them both in different ways. Julian Phillips has a higher ceiling. Dalen Terry is more prepared for this team right now in terms of playing a defensive role. He can overall be a solid, point forward to a certain extent. But I think Julian Phillips needs to unleash him. He needs more minutes and opportunity. I like both those guys, though. I think both should get some minutes this season. It should be rotational players. Backup power forward is the top pick for this year's draft for the Chicago Bulls, Matas Buzelis. He's a guy that I think will be a little bit of a project, needs some time to develop, but I think he's going to be a solid NBA player when it's all said and done. And then you have Torrey Craig, another guy's a good veteran in the team. Back at Vucevic at the center spot, Jalen Smith. He's had an up and down NBA career. We've seen him have a couple good years in Indiana, lost his rotational role now out there in Chicago, and I think he's going to be able to be a good, solid backup center. However, here's a few things I want to point out for this team. First of all, you have two-way spots right now, and Adama Sanogo, he's locked in, DJ Stewart. You have one opening spot who I think has a good chance of being signed to EJ Liddell, who's on an E10 still in the contract. Those would be a 3-2-way deals. I think that's what's going to happen. Maybe they sign somebody else. Might be wrong there. But I want to emphasize one thing here. Adama Sanogo. Here's what I love about this. He reminds me a lot of what Andre Drummond brought to the Chicago Bulls last year and what Andre Drummond is now becoming in his career. A good backup center, rebounds well. You can trust him to play and be productive when you need him to play some minutes and maybe start spot here. Start 10, 15 games a season. He's going to be that kind of player. I think he deserves to be added on to the standard contract and get signed to that deal. Would not shock me if we see that by the end of the season and ultimately become the backup center for the Chicago Bulls. But I think being mentored by Andre Drummond last year was huge for him. I think he's going to make a nice jump for this team. Now, that's what I've got for into overall the roster. But I mentioned in the beginning of this preview that the Chicago Bulls have a predicament right now. Here's what I would do. You have two options. Right now, it appears that they're going to pursue trying to be competitive. Option number 2 is blow it up. But here's what I want to say. It's time to blow up this roster. Regardless of how good Zach LaVine, Vucevic, whoever it is, plays this year, they're not winning the NBA championship. They're not going to be a team that makes a very, very productive overall season. They're not going to be a team that's a top 6 seed or whatever the case may be. This team's not winning a championship. That's what matters at the end of the day. And you have young pieces already in place where you almost are at a standpoint where I could say, you know what? It's not even a rebuilding. It's a retooling. It's okay, Zach LaVine played good. What can we get from him? Can we get a first-round pick in this next year's draft? Vucevic, can we get him something? Can we get something for him that can be helping our team out? And the reason I say that is because, listen, Josh Giddey and Kobe White already have their minutes. Good. They're going to be your backcourt going forward. Lonzo Ball, I'm intrigued to see what happens there. Ayo Dosunmu, like him, already discussed him. But I already said, I like what Julian Phillips brings to the table. I think if you're the Chicago Bulls and you can give Julian Phillips a larger role this season, I think they're going to reap the rewards of that. He's played his duty last year on a rotational role, spot minutes here and there, G League minutes. He's ready to play and be a starter for this team. And he's not going to get a lot of opportunity if Zach LaVine is still there. If you open up the door and let Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry both play a lot more and establish those guys, let them get more minutes and develop the core. And then you get Patrick Williams continuing to develop minutes and you let Matas Buzelis, he's going to need to develop. If you say this year's going to be a season where you get rid of Zach LaVine and Vucevic by the trade deadline, and you give them the second half of the season just to develop these young pieces here, and you let them all to kind of establish who is your best players, who fits well together, what's the young core, and what are we going to do moving forward, that would be huge for the Chicago Bulls. Because then you head into the draft, you have a chance of drafting a superstar player. This upcoming draft is stacked. If you can land that superstar player to go alongside these other great young players I just talked about, you're looking at next season, or at least maybe 2 years from that point, and say this is actually a team that has a much higher ceiling. They're going to be very competitive again. And that's where I think the best decision is for the Chicago Bulls. Playing this little, trying to be competitive, just get into the playoff situation, it makes no sense. It's not productive. It's not going to help the franchise out. So discover the core this year, build around those young guys, Go draft a superstar player and start actually retooling and getting ready to be competitive once again by not playing this little waiting game and seeing how competitive you can be by being just getting the playoff team. That's what I think the Chicago Bulls need to do. And I think overall, fans would be excited to see these young guys play. They've got talent. Let them go play.